everyone, a very warm welcome to another edition of World Panorama. Like always, get ready to catch up on the biggest international news of the week. I'm Sana Khan. Before we get to detailed reports, here's a look at the top stories. No end in sight to the US shutdown, even as debt ceiling fight nears. Republicans threaten to take debt limit fight to the brink. Feeling sidelined, Israel's Netanyahu warns White House about Iran. US holds out prospects of some sanctions relief for Iran over the nuclear program. Italian Prime Minister Enrico Letta wins the fight to keep his government alive, even as a humiliated Berlusconi is forced into a U-turn on toppling the government. And FIFA launches a consultation process to decide whether to stage the 2022 World Cup in Qatar outside the traditional slot. Decision is put on hold. Our top story this week, the fight between President Obama, Democrats and Republicans is now a two-pronged fiscal confrontation to avoid a potential default on the nation's $16.7 trillion debt. Now, what began for congressional Republicans as an effort to gut the healthcare law is now bigger. The shutdown appears likely to drag on for another week and possibly longer. Bowing to the reality that the impasse requires him to remain in Washington, President Obama has cancelled plans to attend summits in Indonesia and Brunei. In another development, the White House has ruled out using a legal veto to force Congress to extend the U.S. debt limit as conservative Republicans threaten to take what Treasury describes as a potentially catastrophic economic standoff to the brink of a 17th October deadline. Now, October 17th is the date that the Congress must raise the nation's borrowing authority or risk default, and members of the Congress expect it to be the flashpoint for a larger clash over the U.S. budget as well as Obama's healthcare law. Now, what is the crisis all about? We talk about the basics and the intricacies involved. This week on the show with me is Ambassador Meera Shankar. Welcome to World Panorama, ma'am. But before we discuss the developments, here's a look at this report.
Shutdown continued in America. US President Barack Obama launched a blistering attack on the Republicans for their reckless refusal to pass a clean spending bill to end the government shutdown.
So this is not about spending, and this is not about fiscal responsibility. This whole thing is about one thing: the Republican obsession with dismantling the Affordable Care Act and denying affordable health insurance to millions of Americans. That's all this has become about. That seems to be the only thing that unites the Republican Party these days.
The continued budget impasse between Republicans and Democrats in the US Congress is raising concerns that the rival parties may fail to agree on raising the US debt ceiling by mid-October, which could cause the government to default on its debts.
You know, at times like this, the American people expect their leaders to come together and to try to find ways to resolve their differences. The president reiterated one more time tonight that he will not negotiate.
Obama, on his part, said he was willing to negotiate some changes to the Affordable Care Act to improve it, but he would not allow the law to be dismantled. According to the president of the American Federation of Government Employees, which represents 670,000 union members, as many as 1 million US federal employees face unpaid furloughs or payless paydays during the shutdown.
I expect the shutdown will probably be resolved in the next few days. It won't be resolved immediately, and I think it's Congress has understood this isn't going to have huge implications for the economy in the short term, and behaving a bit like a petulant child. If you know the consequences aren't major, you just do. They're just making their point pretty much, and it will be resolved. It's not that significant in the long term.
As the government shutdown entered its fourth day, Obama and White House officials will have to weigh carefully just how hard they want to push Boehner, who is under intense pressure from the most conservative lawmakers in his party, to not capitulate to a president who says he will not negotiate over either a short-term continuing resolution to keep the government open or the looming debt limit.
All right, Ambassador Shankar, let me start by asking you that by now it's so much around in the media that we know why it really started. But the question I'm going to ask you is, could this have been avoided in the first place?
Well, it certainly could have been avoided if both parties had not been so ideologically driven. In some sense, it reflects the huge gulf which has opened up on how to handle the economy and the US finances between the Republican Party, which now has a radical fiscal conservative wing, the
Right.
Tea Party, and the Democrats. In the past, we've had 17 shutdowns, government shutdowns in the US economy. I mean, when there's been a failure to pass the budget, they've been short-lived, just for a few days. I think the longest was 17 years ago, which was also the last shutdown, which was for 21 days. So one would hope that saner counsel will prevail on both sides and that they'll be able to overcome their ideological differences or rise above them to find a way forward.
Right. And for that, we are looking at a date of October 17th. Now, I tried to, mention that in my introduction, but I want you to tell our viewers, why is that date important, and can we hope for a solution come 17th?
Well, that date is important because that's the date the US will reach its enhanced debt ceiling of $16.7 trillion. And therefore, if the borrowing limits for the US government are not raised, then the US government could potentially go into default. Now, the Treasury might be able to continue in some way from incoming tax revenues till about 1st November. But on 1st November, I'm told there are two major payments which are due. A $25 billion bill for Social Security, which is a mandatory payment, not dependent on annual resolutions by Congress. And then there's the $30 billion interest payment on US government bonds, which the US government has been floating. So I think the Treasury Secretary has said, failure to raise the borrowing limits on 17th October could, before 17th October or by 17th October, could have potentially catastrophic ramifications.
Right. All right, now I'm going to come to Barack Obama. Now, he has cancelled his important foreign trips to Asia. Now, staying home does, in a way, ramps up pressure on the Republicans, but that also means ignoring certain key, essential things that President Obama would have dealt with had he gone on these trips. In fact, some are also saying that it's a complete lack of leadership on the part of Barack Obama. How do you see it?
Well, I think this is a very important issue for the US. So I think his going overseas would have been difficult in the circumstances. But it shows how the ramifications spill beyond the realm of purely finances and the economy to also impact the US ability to conduct diplomacy. It's seen as hamstrung, in a sense, by this huge partisan way in which their parties are functioning.
Right. Also, Ambassador Shankar, we are seeing these developments, what is happening. Do you think when this impasse is resolved, Obamacare will survive? What is your take on that?
Well, I think it was a law which was passed fair and square by the Congress at a time when the Democrats controlled the House of Representatives and the Senate. The Republicans made this a big issue in the presidential election, but their candidate lost.
Right.
So it's law as of today. But I don't know if there's scope for some minor compromises or minor improvements. Because if you take a look at how the US handled, for instance, the fiscal cliff negotiations last year and then in the beginning of this year, there was a little bit of give and take.
But do you think the way Republicans have kind of backed off on Obamacare bit by bit, first they wanted complete scrapping, now they wanted to delay by a year, I'm asking you in that perspective, there are likely chances that it might just survive.
Oh, I think certainly it'll be, I think for President Obama, the law is a major achievement of his first term.
Right.
And having achieved it and staked so much of his reputation on it, even during the presidential campaign. I don't think that a rollback of the law would be something that he would easily contemplate.
Right.
But some tinkering, some improvements, maybe, something to do with, small business owners having to provide health insurance to employees or whatever. Some improvements might be possible, or at least there could be a willingness to have some discussions.
Well, let's hope
on
this
the issue.
deadlock is soon resolved, as economically it's going to have wider ramifications for the world at large. Thank you so much, Ambassador Shankar. It was a pleasure having you on World Panorama with me. With that, we are taking a very short break, but lots more up ahead. The latest on Iran's nuclear program and how the talks are coming around. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Now, did the US win a breakthrough in talks with Iran on the country's controversial nuclear program? US President Barack Obama and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu disagree over what to do next. The Israeli military option, which is off the table for now, might come back into the picture in the coming spring if talks between Iran and the 6 superpowers fail.
I want there to be no confusion on this point. Israel will not allow Iran to get nuclear weapons. If Israel is forced to stand alone, Israel will stand alone.
Despite some tough rhetoric in a speech to the UN by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, it will be all but impossible for Israel to take military action once negotiations between Iran and world powers resume.
Iran is committed to Israel's destruction. So for Israel, the ultimate test of a future agreement with Iran is whether or not Iran dismantles its military and nuclear program.
But it is now clear that Barack Obama's decision to open a dialogue with Iran's Hassan Rouhani appears to have robbed Israel of a key asset in its campaign to prevent the Islamic Republic from developing a nuclear weapon, the threat of unilaterally attacking Iranian nuclear facilities.
What I also shared with the Prime Minister is that because of the extraordinary sanctions that we have been able to put in place over the last several years, the Iranians are now prepared, it appears, to negotiate. We have to test diplomacy.
But despite the thaw in ties, US insists that sanctions on Iran stay for now.
Some of us are moving forward with a new round of sanctions that will require further reduction in purchases of Iranian petroleum. But we are also serious about relief from sanctions if the Iranian government meets its Security Council responsibilities.
The line set by Israel's leader differed from the White House's position that Tehran could maintain some of its nuclear enrichment capabilities if it allowed the international community to verify that Iran's program was solely for peaceful purposes. Signs of US-Iranian rapprochement have rattled Israel, which accuses Iran of trying to buy time and ease international sanctions so it can pursue development of nuclear weapons.
And Italian Prime Minister Enrico Letta scored a major political victory on Wednesday as his government comfortably won a confidence vote, seeing off a threat from former Premier Silvio Berlusconi to bring down the ruling Grand Coalition. But the bigger battle will be to revive a sclerotic economy that is emerging as a major threat to the Eurozone's recovery.
Senatori presenti 307, senatori votanti 305, maggioranza 153, senatori favorevoli 235, senatori contrari 70, senatori astenuti 0, il Senato approva.
After days of political chaos, Italian Prime Minister Enrico Letta won confidence votes in both houses of parliament when Conservative leader Silvio Berlusconi at the last minute abandoned his bid to topple the government.
Il fatto che l'Italia ha bisogno di un governo che possa produrre quelle riforme strutturali e istituzionali di cui il Paese ha bisogno per modernizzarsi. Abbiamo deciso, non senza interno travaglio, di esprimere un voto di fiducia a questo governo.
Letta was supported by 235 senators, while 70 opposed him during a voting in Rome. Berlusconi's decision leaves Letta in office, but opens a series of questions about the already fragmented Italian political landscape, including whether the coalition government will be able to operate normally and pass badly needed economic reforms.
If the government had fallen, then there was every chance that Italy wouldn't even get out of recession at the beginning of next year. And as things stand, there is a reasonable possibility that the recession will be over, with very small growth rates at the beginning, in this final quarter now of 2013 and the first quarter of 2014.
Berlusconi is now waiting for the Senate's decision over his ejection from Parliament. He's fighting for his political survival after an August conviction for tax fraud that will leave him without a seat in Parliament and serving a year under house arrest or in community service.
Exacting revenge, the US on Wednesday decided to expel 3 Venezuelan diplomats a day after 3 American officials were accused of sabotage and ordered to leave the Latin American country. Now, relations between the United States and Venezuela have remained at the level of charged affairs since the late 2010, when Caracas rejected the proposed US ambassador and Washington retaliated by expelling the Venezuelan envoy.
The U.S. Embassy in Venezuela defended 3 diplomats expelled by President Nicolas Maduro, rejecting charges they were involved in espionage and acquisitions. Washington is trying to destabilize the opaque nation.
They were given 48 hours to leave the country. We completely reject the Venezuelan government's allegations of U.S. government involvement in any type of conspiracy to destabilize the Venezuelan government. We reject the specific claims against 3 members of our embassy. In accordance with the Vienna Convention on diplomatic relations and on consular relations, the United States may take reciprocal action.
The statement came just after, in a retaliatory move, the U.S. expelled 3 Venezuelan diplomats. The U.S. government gave 48-hour deadline on Tuesday to Venezuelan charge d'affaires Calixto Ortega Rios, Second Secretary Monica Alejandro Sanchez Morales at the Washington Embassy, and Consul Marisol Guterres de Almeida at the Houston Consulate to leave the country. Venezuelan state television aired video it claimed showed 3 U.S. diplomats emerging from the offices of an organization linked to the country's opposition.
No me importa las acciones que tome el gobierno de Barack Obama. No vamos a permitir que venga un gobierno imperial a traer dinero y a ver cómo paran las empresas básicas, a ver cómo le quitan la electricidad para pagar todo Venezuela. ¿Qué es eso?
The expulsions throw a wrench into cautious efforts this year to restore full diplomatic ties that were frayed for most of the 14-year rule of late socialist leader Hugo Chavez. For years, the late President Hugo Chavez denounced American imperialism in Latin America.
And much else has been unfolding around the world. Here's a quick wrap of other international news of the week.
Tension is high in the northwestern Myanmar town after Buddhist mobs torched 2 homes belonging to Muslims. The bodies of 4 men were found near the town of Pandey in the state of Rakhine. A 94-year-old woman was confirmed killed earlier in the day. The deaths come as President Thein Sein visits Rakhine state. Chinese President Xi Jinping and his Indonesian counterpart Susilo Yudhoyono agreed that it is the common responsibility of the countries in the region to maintain peace and stability in the South China Sea. Making his first visit to Southeast Asia since taking power in March, Xi addressed the maritime disputes, which critics say have been rekindled by Beijing's increasingly assertive claims to almost the entire South China Sea. The operator of Japan's crippled Fukushima nuclear plant TEPCO said on Thursday another tank holding highly contaminated water overflowed, probably sending the liquid into the Pacific Ocean in the second such breach in less than 2 months. Amid mounting international alarm, Japan's government stepped in last month and said it would fund efforts to improve water management at the plant. Russian President Vladimir Putin said global powers are on the right track with a plan to eliminate Syria's chemical weapons and can avert military intervention in the conflict if they work together. Also, Putin has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. An advocacy group nominated him for bringing about a peaceful resolution to the Syrian-US dispute over chemical weapons. Bangladesh War Crimes Tribunal sentenced a senior opposition leader and lawmaker to death in the seventh such verdict by the body, which has been set up to probe abuses during the country's bloody struggle for independence. Salahuddin Qadir Chaudhry, a legislator from the main opposition Bangladesh Nationalist Party, was found guilty of torture, rape and genocide during the War for Independence from Pakistan in 1971.
Shifting gears, time to bring you up to speed with all the sports news that you might have missed through this week. Here's all the sports action.
FIFA has given its unequivocal backing to Qatar hosting the troubled 2022 World Cup, and the leader of their organizing committee has no fears either about losing the tournament. FIFA's executive committee seemed unlikely to reach a decision at their meeting in Zurich over a Winter World Cup in Qatar in 2022. Soccer's governing body was to discuss whether the 2022 event should be moved from summer to winter because of the heat. Qatar has said it is happy to accommodate a change in the dates, while insisting it can still stage a good tournament during the summer months. Frenchman Sébastien Ogier secured his first world title on the opening day of the Rally of France on Thursday when his only rival Thierry Neuville failed to clinch the stage win he needed. Ogier met expectations with an all but perfect year, winning 6 out of the first 10 races and finishing second behind Loeb, but ahead of all other contenders in Monte Carlo and Argentina. The Rally of France is the third last race of the season, with only Spain and Britain remaining. Greenpeace campaigners briefly interrupted a Champions League match in Basel to protest against sponsor and Russian energy agent Gazprom, following the detention of 30 activists over a stunt highlighting the firm's Arctic oil drilling. The match between Switzerland's Basel and Schalke of Germany was halted for about 5 minutes as 4 environmentalists clad in orange jumpsuits abseiled from the roof of the St. Jacob Park Stadium in Basel. Former Manchester City manager Roberto Mancini has signed a 3-year deal with Galatasaray to replace Fatih Terim, who was sacked as coach last week. The Italian was appointed 2 days before his new club was to face Juventus in the Champions League. Galatasaray said Mancini would be paid $4.74 million for the rest of the season and $4.5 million for each of the following 2 seasons, excluding bonuses.
And time now for all the very latest news from the world of movies, music and lifestyle. Here's our entertainment wrap. With this kind of attractiveness, it's no wonder that Sandra Bullock and George Clooney were cast in Gravity. The megastars flashed smiles that beamed like pulsars and showed that magnetism isn't the only force they exude as they strode into the premiere of the new sci-fi flick in New York. The filmmakers and Warner Brothers Pictures ended up spending more than $80 million to make the 3D film, with technological innovations that reproduce space and zero gravity in ways never seen on screen. The latest trailer for The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug, shows a few more images from Part 2 of Peter Jackson's trilogy of Lord of the Rings prequels. Warner Brothers Studios continue to drum up suspense ahead of its much-anticipated release, slated to arrive in US theaters in December. The tension mounts in this new 2-minute 30-second clip, the film's official main trailer. Stars Julie Andrews, Jane Fonda and William Shatner were among celebrities who graced the red carpet in Los Angeles to celebrate the Walt Disney Concert Hall's 10-year anniversary. The evening itself truly honors the vision of Frank Gehry, the architect behind the modern, yet timeless design that almost immediately earned its place among the city's iconic landmarks. US designer Marc Jacobs is leaving Louis Vuitton as its artistic director. The latest Louis Vuitton collection was shown at Paris Fashion Week at the capital's famous Louvre Museum, and the rumor of Jacobs' departure flooded social media sites. Reports say the designer was leaving Vuitton to focus on his own brand. That's all we have for you in this edition of World Panorama. See you next week, same time, with more international news. Till then, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. This week, I close the show with a special exhibition in London. The international launch of the We Love Mandela art exhibit showcases works inspired by anti-apartheid leader Nelson Mandela. London was chosen because of the city's long-standing contribution to the fight against apartheid. This is Meisana Khan signing off.